Good morning. How's everybody doing? I can feel the energy. That's fabulous on a Monday morning, and it's great to see so many folks here for this seminar. I'd like to start this morning. I'm just here as an introducer, but I want to start with a little informal poll, an informal survey. Okay, so just respond by raising your hands. By show of hands, how many of you want to be chefs in your future? Okay. Might seem obvious to some folks. How many want to be pastry chefs? Pastry chefs. How many want to be front of the house managers? The folks in ties. Way to go. How many people want to be involved with wine? I mean, in a professional sense. Okay, couple wine. How many want to be entrepreneurs? Own your own business. How many want to be corporate executives? Have you wanted to be absolutely everything so far this morning? That's okay. How many want to be involved in the produce industry? How many people want to launch a fast food concept? How many people would like to be president of the Culinary Institute of America? And how many are still unsure? All right, great. Well, this is the place. This is the place for you. Deciding for all of us what we want to be when we grow up, I have found, is a lifelong process, and it can often seem like a daunting task, particularly during our college years, and especially in an industry like ours, which is so massive, so diverse, and so full of opportunity. Food service is truly an industry of opportunity where one can still to this day, and this isn't true in many industries anymore. In our industry, you can go from the dish room to the boardroom in a fairly short period of time, and that is just tremendous. And so a little while ago, I was giving a talk for students about the curricular changes that we were contemplating, and we've been thinking about the fact that our industry is so immense and so much opportunity. And a student, Ann Hurley, was in the audience, and one of the things I said was we wanted to provide more classes, more seminars, more information for our students about the depth and breadth of our industry and all the opportunities that are available in our industry. And so Ann, working with the Career Services Office, decided that she would try to help us get this seminar together. And I think because of that initiative, Ann deserves a round of applause. Ann. So a tremendous amount of opportunity in our industry. I'll give you at least one piece of advice as you think about career choices and make career choices. And my simple piece of advice is to keep an open mind. You may be dead set right now on being a chef in a restaurant and being an entrepreneur and find yourself 30 years later in a completely different place. And how do I know that? I know that because that's my story. If you would have asked me when I was a student at the CIA, if I thought that I was going to be the president of the CIA, I would have bet every single cent that I had that that would not happen. It wasn't even, part of my thinking at the time of my life that you're in right now as a student at the CIA. So have an open mind, be flexible, and you never know what opportunities will present themselves and the choices that you'll make and where those opportunities will take you. So to help guide you through those opportunities, I want to introduce the person who is going to conduct this seminar, the person that you all came to see today, someone I've known for a very long time. She is one of the best known and most highly regarded people in our industry. I don't know if you know that, but that is a fact. One of the best known and highly regarded. Did you make a face at me? She's been a consultant on the development of some of the most famous restaurant projects in history, two of which were the Rainbow Room and Windows on the World. Windows on the World. And she worked very closely with the legendary Joe Baum. I don't know if you know that name, but if you don't, you should. Joseph Baum was one of the most visionary and knowledgeable restaurateurs, concept developers in the history of the food service industry. And our speaker today worked side by side with him for many, many years on many important projects. She's been past president of such high-profile food organizations as Les Dames d'Escoffier and IACP, the International Association of Culinary Professionals. She is a highly revered author and winner of numerous awards, including a Julia Child Cookbook Award. She was Woman of the Year by New York University. She was awarded James Beard Who's Who in Food and Wine and has garnered 10 Tastemaker Awards. I'm proudest of the fact, however, that she is a faculty member here at the Culinary Institute of America. And with all of that said, I'm pleased to introduce Ms. Irena Chalmers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tim Ryan. We worked together. I have known and admired President Ryan for many years. We worked together more than 10 years ago on the Culinary Institute 50th anniversary, and I'm very grateful for you for coming today. Thank you also to Anne for organizing this event. This is all about networking, and I'm going to thank Chet Kulik from the Career Services Office, and also the publisher of the book, Eric Kampman, and his associates who have come from New York City. As I said, I have known Tim Ryan for many years, and I met the publisher 26 years ago, I think, when he put a small ad in Publishers Weekly saying that he was looking for a job doing some research. And I asked him if he would do some research for me for the very first speech I ever gave. And he did. And all this time later, that favor was returned by him publishing my book. Normally, after a manuscript of a book is finished, it's very much like working in a whorehouse. Because there's a lot of standing around punctuated by short, sharp bursts of intense activity. But this went really, really fast because the proposal wasn't accepted until the week after Thanksgiving, and then it was published in September, so that was a triumph. I think what everybody's looking for is a job. Not any old job, but a well-paying job, and a job that you're going to love. And the way this book started was, I'm teaching professional food writing in the bachelor's program, and the students are just about to graduate, and I asked what is a very personal question to say. You know, we Brits don't like to ask personal questions, but I asked them what they were going to do when they graduate, and they looked at me like, I haven't had time to think of that because I've been thinking about something that was way more important. And then there was one young woman, she went like this, like, who's this strange foreign old person I could see on her face? And she said she would like to go shopping. And I thought, what a weird thing. Here she spent $800 million on her education, and what she wants to do is to go shopping. And as Tim said, I worked at Windows on the World, which was it was not one restaurant, it was 2 acres of restaurants on the 106th, 107th floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. I was writing the chairman's speeches. Tim said that we worked side by side. We actually sat side by side, mostly in the bar, I confess. So because I was doing a lot of writing for the whole group, I was walking around. You know, if you're in accounting, you tend to stay in accounting. But when I was writing, I met a lot of people, and one of the people who I met was the woman who was buying the tabletop stuff. That's the knives and forks and the fancy plates for the pastry chef who wants a triangular lavin dish for his chocolate cake. And after September the 11th, when the restaurant was no more, she formed a group of restaurants in which she was being the consultant, bringing tabletop teapots and other things so the chef could choose these pots. And this student who wanted to go shopping works for her. So she goes shopping all day because she has to take back all the things that the chef doesn't choose to keep. There was another student in that class, and he walked in, I thought with a bit of a swagger, and he got the Wall Street Journal under his arm, like he was too good for the likes of us with peas and beans and carrots. And so he's now working as a financial analyst on Wall Street, and he's a consultant for food companies. And then there was a third person in the same class, and he said he would like to be a rock star. So I suggested that it would be a really good idea for him to become a personal chef for a rock group. And he did. And when he cooked something cool for them to eat, they sometimes let him play with them. So if you can find that you can match the thing that you love with your culinary knowledge, you will be streets and streets ahead of the game. Martha Stewart and Julia Child both knew what they wanted from the outset. Julia never endorsed a product in her whole life. Julia just wanted to be loved, and she was. She became a national folk hero. And Martha said, "Give me the money." And we did. I know a lot of Martha Stewart stories. So, supposing you're starting from the very beginning, and I do urge you to start thinking about what you want to do now. Don't wait to fix the roof until the hurricane comes. And always be one step ahead. So if disaster strikes, you're prepared for the next thing. I did an interview last week, and the reporter asked me what I wanted to do next. And I said, "I'd like to be a ballerina." And she wrote it down. You shouldn't laugh. So one way to get started is on Sunday, lay out all the sections of the Sunday newspaper and decide to yourself, I'm only going to read one section. That could mean that you are only going to read dining in, or you're going to read style, or you're going to read science section, or you're going to read national news. And that will give you a clue as to what you really want to do. Another thing you can do is to write down on a piece of paper a circle and draw some spokes out of it, like a child's depiction of the sun. And in the center write me, that's you backwards. Then write down all the things you don't want to do. I don't want to work in a hot kitchen with an impolite chef shouting at me. I don't want to work in retail. And write down all the things you don't want to do. And then do the reverse. Draw another picture with the sun on and write down all the things you do want to do. And then you have to kind of see where those clues are leading you. But you have to tell the difference between an idea and a big idea. So when Dr. Ryan said, "What do you want to do?" and many people said they wanted to work in a restaurant, that is really admirable, because as we become a nation that is increasingly illiterate, that means lots of jobs for us, because everybody is counting on you to make dinner. But look what's happening in the food service industry. It's not only a question of working in a restaurant. You might consider going to work as a chef in a university. When Alice Waters' daughter Fanny went to Yale, she suggested that they should have a permanent chef, or a rotating chef, so they had a chef 24 hours a day, who could cook nice, beautiful food for students who were working late. And that became so successful, it became a major profit center for the university. And to induce really top-flight chefs to come to work at the university, they offered them tuition-free for any classes they wanted to go to. And that idea has spread now to all the Ivy League colleges. So think about school as a place to work. There's nobody to shout at you there, and it's not so hot. Also, boarding schools are now instituting cafeterias, as are many industries and places like Google, where the chef works and provides free food for their employees, and they find that's much better because it keeps people chained to their desks for much longer. If you're interested in art, consider being the chef in the dining room at a museum. If you're interested in animals, be the chef in the corporate dining room at the zoo. Think of all the other places where you could work. I wonder if anybody at all might be a little bit worried about their car payments and their mortgage. If they are, you could think about being a chef on a cruise ship, or better yet, on a luxury yacht, and you can sail around the world, and when you're 3 miles offshore, you don't have to pay any taxes, you don't have any car payments, and you don't have any rent. And you have lots of people to sleep with at night. So that might be a really good idea. You could work at a country club if you like sports. Country clubs are really good if you're good at event planning, like Anne here, who is leaving. Country clubs, check into all of these different areas because they all have advantages and disadvantages. But most of all, be prepared. Almost everybody at some time in their life is fired. Our president looks as if he's going to be fired any minute. Peter Goss, who was the head of the CIA, was fired, and he had some really good advice for us. He said, if you get fired, blame everyone else. Deny everything and make counter-accusations. Donald Rumsfeld said, there are no knowns, there are things that we know that we know. So for many of us, we know that we're going to stay in the food hospitality industry. And the second part of that was, there are known unknowns, things that we don't know, that we do know that we don't know. And those are things that we would like to get a job, but we don't know exactly what kind of job. And the third part of this is that there are unknown unknowns. And by heavens, these are the opportunities that I hope that you will find, things that you can uniquely do that nobody else can do. I had a student who was from Korea, and I really liked this guy. But undeniably, I had a devil of a time understanding a word he said. And one day he said, you know, my English is very bad. And I said, yes, it is, isn't it? And he was very worried because he had 2 little children and he needed to find a job right away. And he was afraid that he wasn't going to be able to get a job because his English really was incomprehensible. So what did he do? He took his unique skills that none of the rest of us had, and he went to work at the Korean consulate, where everybody spoke his language and he cooked the food they loved. So that's a thought for you. A lot of people want to travel and see the world. Think about going to work in a consulate of the country where you would like to live. You could always join the army and see the world. I'll tell you another story. This was also a true I'm only well, mostly telling you true stories. I also had a student in my writing class, and he wrote the most incredibly good restaurant review of a restaurant called Café des Artistes in the city. Café des Artistes is a landmark restaurant, and on the walls it's got paintings of naked nymphs frolicking, and they can't be moved because it's been landmarked. Nothing can be changed. So this student wrote this, not only this great review, but he went to art books and found reproductions of these paintings, which he included with his review. He included the wine list, and he included the check, and it was just excellent in every way. And absolutely by chance, that evening I ran into the owner of the restaurant, whose name is George Lang. And I told him about this fabulous review I got of his restaurant, and he said, please, can I see it? And I said, I don't know. I will ask the student when I see him on Thursday if he would give me permission to let you see it. And the student said yes. And then I thought, whoa, maybe you would like to meet George Lang. And he said he would. And I called George and said, this student would like to meet you. And he said, good, because he was looking for an assistant. George Lang at that time was renovating a hotel in Budapest called Gundels. So the next day, I was so pleased with myself, and I went into the class and I took with me George Lang's biography. And the student opened it up and he looked down the flyleaf and he said, oh, he's Hungarian. And I said, yes. And he said, my parents are Hungarian. I said, oh, that's good. And I said, do you speak Hungarian? Yes, he said he spoke 5 languages. So I thought, you know, here's my future job. I'm a matchmaker. So George Lang invited the student for lunch, and then next week I could barely wait to get to class to say, so how'd it go? And he said, I didn't go. And I said, what? You didn't go? And he said, why didn't you go? And he said, well, he'd been offered a job in Iowa that came with a car. And also his girlfriend lived there. And here's 2 morals to this story. One is, when you're thinking of making a change, the very, very, very last person you should discuss this with is anybody who loves you. Because they're going to want to keep you by their side and never let you go. And the other thing is that this student, if he had gone to Budapest, would have met all the famous food people in the world, and he would have been 5 minutes from Rome, and 5 minutes from Paris, and 5 minutes from London, and 5 minutes from Madrid, and his whole life would have been changed. So there is no such thing as security. Princess Di had what we would think might be security. She got to marry that handsome prince that I had my eye on too. And he was, well, he wasn't closer to my age, but he was a lot older than her too. So she lived in a palace. She wore a tiara. She had diamonds everywhere. And she had both medical and dental benefits, I bet. And she didn't have security. So change is going to happen to all of us. It's the only constant in our lives, and we have to be prepared for those changes. We all have to take a risk, and that student who took the risk of not going to Budapest maybe lost one of the great chances in his life. The good part of this is that most people change jobs at least 5 times in their life. So if you're not happy, this is my second piece of advice. You've got to leave, because if you stay, it's like a wombat, W-O-M-B-A-T, a waste of money, brains, and time. So you might find we have so many students here who have changed careers, and that's because they had enormous courage, enormous courage. They had enough courage to realize that the ladder that they had been climbing all this time was leaning against the wrong wall. And they came down that ladder, and now they have to find something else. that will make them happy. Supposing you decided that your dream job, perhaps, would be to be a garbage anthropologist. I bet you never thought of that. But this is an actual real job. There was a garbage anthropologist who lived in Dallas. Is anybody here from Dallas? Oh, well, it wasn't from Dallas then, because I'm going to say something rude. He was from an entirely different place. And he worked as a garbage anthropologist, and his task was to go through people's garbage. And what he discovered was that there were a lot of rich people in Dallas, and they drank this very, very expensive whiskey, Scotch whiskey, called Glenlivet. When he looked in their garbage, there were no empty bottles of Glenlivet. There were only empty bottles of cheap Scotch. And so he realized that people were pouring the cheap Scotch into the expensive bottle and pouring it, and everybody said, good. You never know. We think we know everything, and we end up not knowing so very much after all. So if you were an anthropologist, you'd say, well, how can I get from there to getting a real job? Well, there is a real job analyzing people's checkout stubs from the supermarket. And by analyzing 5 items in their basket, they can identify who that person is. So if they looked in my basket and they saw some English marmalade and some McCann's Irish oatmeal, they would get a pretty good idea that I wasn't from Budapest. And they could analyze who's buying baby food and who's buying diet food. And that's how you get all of those pieces of junk mail, because they figured out that this is exactly who you are. And from that, they can analyze what kind of car you're likely to buy, where you're likely to go on vacation, and several other things. This kind of transfer of knowledge is incredibly important. Amazon has just discovered that they can analyze a personality and predict how they're going to vote based on the books that they're buying. So you might think that you would enjoy being a trend tracker. That would be a very interesting job to have. Another interesting job is to be a futurist. There's a lot to be said for being a futurist. For one thing, when the future comes, nobody remembered what you said. And if you were wrong, you can always make some adjustments. When you're thinking about what you would like to do, think about what you already like to do and what you already love. Supposing, for instance, what you really like to do would be to be a writer, but you would also like to spend a lot of time riding your Harley. Then you could be a writer for a magazine that goes to bikers. One thing that I would not advise you to do is to think that if you wanted to be a food writer, that you should go to any of the first magazines that come to your mind. Places like Gourmet and Bon Appetit and Saveur and Cooking Light. You would have a terribly difficult time breaking into that, partly because they mostly use stories created in-house, or they have a favorite pool of writers. But this doesn't mean that you couldn't be a food writer in a different context. If you like to write, you could go and work as a food publicist. There are perks to all of these separate jobs. There are good things and there are bad things to them. And you have to really do quite a lot of research to figure out what the good things are. If you're a food publicist, a lot of business is done at lunchtime in fancy restaurants, and paid for by the client. So there are opportunities of being a food writer that aren't terribly obvious. I met somebody recently who is really earning a living writing menus for restaurants. You would think, well, how could you possibly earn a living doing this? Well, one thing is that if you put on the menu roast chicken, $8.95, that would be okay. If you said roasted chicken, that implies there's somebody back here doing it just for you. So then it's $10.95. And then if you say it's Farmer Giles roasted chicken, that's another $1. And if you said it's roasted organic chicken, see how the price keeps escalating? And if you said it's Farmer Giles free-range roasted organic chicken, boy, it's $18. And this is silly, you know, because if they say it's free-range chicken, that's quite dangerous. It's almost as dangerous as having a free-range boyfriend, because you really never know where he's been. So, there is an author who is at Cornell University, and he does all sorts of studies, really testing what we think we know. And he figured out, how much do you think it costs for a glass of iced tea? Is about $1.50, $2, depending where you're drinking it. Supposing you finish drinking your iced tea, and the server comes along and says, would you like some more? And you say, oh, what a nice place this is. I think I'll come back here. Do you know how much it costs for iced tea? 3 cents. So pretty soon, if you served enough glasses of iced tea and you got enough regular customers, you don't have to keep selling the restaurant night after night after night. You have restaurant customers coming in all the time. If you're a pastry chef, who are the people who said they wanted to be pastry chefs? This might not befall you, but it befalls some people that they get a little bit older. Some of us get a whole lot older and don't want to work in a restaurant anymore. There's a pastry chef who decided he didn't want to work in a restaurant anymore, but he still wanted to be a pastry chef. And so he changed careers. And what he did instead was to start a new business in which he was painting people's wedding cakes with one slice taken out. And because he'd been a pastry chef, he could do all of that beautiful pastillage work and be able to create all those lovely flowers that are trailing down the cakes instead of that old bride and groom in plastic that they used to be. And so then he sells people these acrylic paintings. And if somebody's spent $20,000 on their wedding gown, they're quite willing to spend $1,000 on a painting of their wedding cake. And that wedding cake may last longer even than their wedding. Who knows? Perhaps here's a thing that you could do. As you look at the current situation in the world, we can look back to the Democratic National Convention of 1968, because that was a huge, huge turning point in the food world. In 1968 was a time comparable with now, when the students were protesting against the war in Vietnam. And the convention was televised, and all the television audience saw Mayor Daley clubbing the students, and they were bleeding, and they were thrown into paddy wagons and carried off. What happened immediately after that was that there became a sense of distrust of the police, of government and government agencies. And way over here on the wrong side of the tracks, kids started opening what they called health food stores. And they sold a whole lot of brown things. They sold brown rice and brown flour and brown coffee beans and foods that once were white that are now gone bad. And the girls wore long skirts and sandals, and the young men had pigtails and their knees out of their blue jeans. And their entire vocabulary was limited to 3 words, which were, oh, wow, man. And that was the very beginning of the organic food movement. And look where it's gone now. Green has become the symbolic language of the world. If you're keeping up with all of these trends, you will see that we have reached another pivotal moment like this today. And I saw on one of the online food information sites, which is Specialty Food Association, check into that one because they send bulletins every single day. And here is one restaurant that's starting to serve 100-mile foods. That means only foods that have been grown within a radius of 100 miles. And I would like to bet you anything that that really, really is going to catch on. There was a time when we thought that the only food worth eating was food that grew within our own zip code. That came from abroad, and now it's only from our own zip code, and that's increasingly going to happen. Except in Alaska, where rumor has it they're going to start an industry of frozen vegetables. And baked Alaska. Or cooked goose, depending on which side you belong to on that equation. So, I want you to be thinking about what you want to do and what you can ask me. If you're applying for a job, compare it with buying a ticket to the lottery. If you know that your chances are 1,000,000 to 1 that you're not going to get that job, you don't feel that it's your fault. You didn't really expect to get it anyway. If you decide to apply for a job and you do a big mailing to everybody you can think of, statistically, your chances of getting a response, let alone an interview, are less than 4%. That means only 4 people out of 100 are going to get an interview. 96 out of 100 will not. Okay, with those odds, if you send out that mailing and you know that, and you think, oh, well, I wasn't one of the 4, I'll do it again. And if you send out 40 mass mailings, your chances of getting an interview don't change. So don't keep knocking your head against the same wall. Change tactics. The best way that you can find work is through networking. And I can't begin to overemphasize how important that is. When I was writing this food jobs book, I incorporated the voices of many students from here and from many experts, people whose names you will recognize from other parts of our industry. So I didn't know how to be a culinary librarian like our wonderful Christina. If you ever want any help, go to Christina. She knows everything. So I got the librarian from the Schlesinger Library to write What Is It Like to Be a Culinary Librarian? And I asked a bookseller, what is it like to be a bookseller selling only food books and cookbooks? And so all of this networking is incredibly important because it really pays off. And it also pays to volunteer. There are a lot of events going on all around us. Share Our Strength is one. The James Beard Awards is another, but there are many, many of them. And they're listed every single Wednesday in the New York Times. So if you're reading the New York Times only online, you miss all of these calendar events. So try networking and have a little speech ready, because you never know who you're sitting next to, who you might meet, and you have to have a little speech that says, I really want to be a pastry chef. And by golly, the person next to you turns out to be Jacques Torres. Who would have guessed? So be prepared, be thinking what you want to do. I have a book I want to recommend to you, which I heard an interview on NPR last week. And this woman has written a book called Ask for It. And in it, she describes a situation where, this applies to men as well, but it specifically, she was speaking of women, that supposing you get a job offer, and the job offer is offering you a salary of $25,000, you can either say, oh, thank you very much, yes, please, or you can say, please, sir, I'd rather have 30,000. And the chances are that if you don't ask for it, you're not going to be offered that extra 5,000. If you took that 5,000 and you invested it at 5% interest, when you got to retire, you would have $750,000 in the bank. Or you would have until last week, in which case you wouldn't have anything. But generally speaking, look at that. Here's another thing that this author mentioned in her book, and that was that when people were recruiting, judges were recruiting for the symphony orchestra, if they heard the artists on tape, the chances of a woman being offered a seat in the Philharmonic Orchestra increased 70% than if they'd watched a live performance. So tape everything, start writing a blog, because you never know who's going to see it. You might be writing a blog and you're innocently writing along about your experiences, and by golly, along comes a publisher who says, would you like to write a cookbook for me? And you say, yes, please. And they say, would you like a $10,000 advance? And you say, no, thank you, I would rather have 50. So remember to do that. So now I'm going to stop and remind you that you have to take a risk with everything, or your dream will never come true. Can you imagine? Here's Christopher Columbus, and he's speaking to the Queen, and he says, Izzy, can I have 3 little ships? I want to sail to America. And she says, don't be silly, there's no such place. And he said, yes, I think there is. And she says, well, I think you should wait, because in 300 years you can probably get a cheap flight to Miami. So take the risk, and remember what I said, if you don't ask for it, nobody's going to come along and give it to you. So now, who has a question for me? Something that somebody's career. Have you got an idea of something you would like to do? Yes.
I have a question. I'm thinking about working my way up and eventually opening my own pastry chef consulting business. How successful, if you ever, have worked with anyone in that field, are those businesses usually?
Very, because you can see increasingly chefs are not only getting their own menus, but they're getting their name on the menu too. And so there is a feeling that if you have the name of the restaurant on your jacket there, then it's the restaurant which is the most important. For instance, if you were a Disney restaurant, the name of Mickey Mouse is more important than your name. So if you start planning now, and you go an extern or trail with the famous pastry chefs, people are so accessible. If you call, they will say, come. So you start planning your career from now on, and you learn as much as you can, but don't go in and hope to come out in 2 or 3 weeks. You have to stay for a while, and then build up your resume until you can get your own wedding cake business, or whatever business you hope to end up in. Just remember that we are selling all the time, and mostly what we're selling is ourselves. And so you have to sell eventually your work. So take photographs of everything you do now and watch the progress of it. Yes? Wait just a second, because along comes Adrian with the microphone.
Already having an education degree, I want to eventually move into a place where I can teach culinary skills, but not necessarily at a culinary college. What's the best way to go about getting to that point?
Well, Tim Ryan said a little while ago that at this very instant, now, today, there are 73,000 students enrolled in professional culinary schools. So we stand alone, of course, because we're the best. But I think everybody will agree with that statement. But there's all these other schools, the arts institutes, of which there are like 22 already, and the Cordon Bleu schools, of which there are very many. But there are also universities. I think you may be familiar with the magazine Gastronomica, which the founder editor is Dara Goldstein, and she is teaching the history, the culture of the foods of Russia. Her field is Russian studies and Russian poetry. And so she's teaching a form of gastronomy through the food and vodka of Russia. So there are many, many opportunities for you. And also there are many opportunities not only for people who are food professionals, but as we become a nation that's increasingly cooking illiterate, it's a possibility that we might go back to actually cooking at home. There was an article in one of the journals just recently where it was forecasting that people are going to switch from feeding their babies formula because they really can't afford the formula and going back to breastfeeding. And that could be a big move. And there are 3 reasons for doing this. One is that the milk is always at the right temperature. The second is that the cat can't get at it. And the third is that it comes in attractive containers. So, any other questions? Nobody has a career objective, Aaron.
Do you see the industry now, because the industry's kind of in this downfall, do you see the industry coming back and giving out again? Like this is just being a bump, I guess.
The hospitality industry is the second largest employer after the federal government. So I can see only an enormously bright future for you. There are things to do that you might never have thought of doing. For instance, supposing you are a food historian, somebody's got to figure out what the actors in Braveheart are eating. It's no good having a PBS series with Jane Austen and people eating cheeseburgers. So your services could come in for use in a variety of ways. So the really difficult thing is to figure out what it is that you want to do, because then you can pursue that path. Otherwise, as Lewis Carroll said in Alice in Wonderland, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So this is hard work. And I was joking in the beginning that people said that they hadn't had time to think about this. It doesn't mean that you should take time off to think about it. It means you should be thinking about it all the time while you're doing other things. Keep reading. Just one chance remark might lead you on a path that you had never thought of doing. There are many jobs in the entrepreneur field. If you go to New York City, you will see people starting a little business selling just one thing, like French fries or peanut butter and jelly and macaroni and cheese. Find the thing that you love. If you can identify what that is, then you're way ahead of the game. It's the worst answer if you apply for a job. The best is somebody says yes. But the worst is not when they say no. It's when you don't have an answer and you're just left hanging. So when you apply for a job, keep the power in your hands and send a cover letter and say that you will call that person on Wednesday at 2 o'clock. And if they're not there, you send another letter and an email and say that you will call them next Thursday at 2 o'clock. And you'll be such a pest that they're going to have to answer. And if they don't answer after 3 tries, you've already got the answer, and the answer's no. So move on. It's when you're just hanging without an answer that life becomes unbearably difficult. Can we take a couple more questions?
What do you think is the average cost of opening a restaurant in New York City?
The average cost?
Of opening restaurant.
You mean the average salary?
No, like how much should I spend to open a restaurant in New York City?
Ah, I
How
see,
much
I
is the
see. How
average
much
cost?
to open one yourself?
And do you think people should risk their do you think people should take out loans to open a restaurant?
No.
If they don't, okay.
I have, of course, obviously it depends on what kind of restaurant. If you're going to have a restaurant designed by Adam Tihany or David Rockwell, it's going to cost $25 million just for design before you've even bought a vacuum cleaner. I would think, do you remember Seinfeld? Do you remember the soup Nazi? Well, here's the deal. Who would have thought that Starbucks could sell you a hot drink that was mostly milk and froth for $4.75 in a paper cup? So the soup nasty. Well, that guy, he's opened a franchise of soup franchises. And he thinks he's going to be able to sell things like lobster bisque and Manhattan clam chowder for even more money than that. And it costs $30,000 for a franchise, and he's already sold 30. So he could retire now and just vanish. But I think if you were going to open a restaurant, this would be an incredibly good time to open a soup kitchen, don't you? And it could be really, really upscale soup kitchen. And one of the things that strikes me, everybody's taken gastronomy, right? And you all had to do a profile of a famous person. And look how many of those people are incredible philanthropists. So you could open a soup kitchen that was a really super soup kitchen, and you could make a deal that for everybody who bought anything, that out of their check, $1 would go for a soup kitchen to all the people who are going to need to be fed. You could translate that idea that everybody who orders a chocolate cake, $1 of that goes to some humanitarian purpose. This is a question of looking to see what's happening in the world. And what's happening is that we have more and more people who are hungry. So if you can combine, again, something that you love and something that you're good at, if it was making soup, you can combine that into a fairly modest restaurant. But I don't think now is the time to be investing in a restaurant of any type. You could erect a tent. The thing is, if you can think of a business where the media is going to come to you and write you up, the saying is that if you can get the publicity, this is something you pray for. But if you have to advertise, that's something you have to pay for. So it's a question of getting a unique position that fills the needs of today. And undeniably, the number of casual restaurants is increasing. The number of really top-flight, high-end restaurants will probably remain pretty static. But let me just tell you about another student I had whose wife just had a baby. And I asked him what he wanted to do, and he said he just wanted to walk around with his baby all day. And so he got a job working to fill in for people who have bed and breakfast businesses. And he learned the business from the inside out. And eventually he'll be able to build his own bed and breakfast business. So for you now, I think the thing is to be learning as much as you can, because these hard times are going to change. And it always does. And we'll have prosperity again. And all this time, this is your luxury time to be thinking about what kind of a place you want. All along, though, it has to make sense to the people who you're serving. Try and think, to whom are you speaking? Like, supposing you were trying to sell cameras. You're not really selling cameras. What you're selling is memories. And in our business, in the restaurant business, we're in the business not of feeding people, but of serving people. And as Joe Baum, who Tim Ryan mentioned, used to say, we are in the business of pleasure, and any threat to pleasure is a threat to business. So you can gather all of these thoughts together before you decide on a philosophy for your own place and your own business. One more question?
Hi. I definitely know that I'm interested in food writing, and I know you mentioned earlier about publicists and, writing menus for restaurants, but how do you actually get started in doing that? Would you recommend starting a portfolio of all the different kinds of writings, or where exactly would you
Well,
go
one
from
way to
there?
get started is to write. I keep being surprised at the number of people who say they want to be a food writer, and I say, please, can I help you? Something went away, the sound went away. I'll shout. So, I'll take your microphone. Start writing for the school newspaper. Continue to write because there are many other opportunities. If you're a specialist, if you have a voice, a strong voice, you could write an article every month. Always the objective is to have a regular column. I write a regular column for Chef magazine, and it's unique in food writing because its characteristic is that it's totally and utterly useless. And everybody else is very earnest, and so I'm writing about rubbish that comes into my head. So you can do that, or you can be very earnest and write for a scientific magazine, in which case you have to be extremely accurate. There was, I think the opportunity of writing in one sector where you're a specialist on, Miss Manners, if anybody is a mummy, they can write about table manners for the rest of their life. You have to find an outlet which suits the subject that you're dealing with. Surprisingly, one area which I have failed to mention that you should also consider when planning your career is to think about going to work for a supermarket. Supermarkets are changing so rapidly, and very soon I can forecast that they won't be selling ingredients anymore. They'll just be selling food ready to eat. Wegmans, which is headquartered in Rochester and has been described as one of the 100 best places to work, provides all sorts of incredible benefits for chefs and pastry chefs as well as culinary people. So that's a good area. They also have a magazine, as do many other supermarkets. And if they don't, you can go and propose one. I think it was Robert Kennedy who said, some people dream of things and ask why, and other people dream of things and ask why not. So many of the people who are our heroes have asked that question, why not me? It takes only one person to start a new business. So thank you all, and I wish you great success. And one last word. If you think I can help you after this class, I'm around here quite a lot, but also I've left you the name of my blog, and you can send me a question, and I will answer you privately. Anne?
Right.
Thank you.
Just really quickly, thank you all so much for coming today. It's a fantastic feeling to see that all these seats filled. Just to let you know, on a very personal note, Irena has helped me tremendously. She's been my mentor since I walked in the door here. Also, I've worked very, very closely with Denise and some other folks at Career Services. I'm getting ready to graduate in about, I don't know, let's see, 4 weeks and 1 day. So I'm not counting down or anything. What I'm going to do with this culinary career has been something I've been thinking about since I also walked in the door. I've got a long background in graphic design, marketing, branding. I've been working probably longer than some of you have been alive, and which is kind of scary. But this has been such an amazing experience, and I really strongly suggest take advantage of people like Irena, like the library, like Career Services, your chefs. I've spent so much time talking to people and making connections and putting ideas together, and the reason I'm doing that is the reason I came here. I came here because this is the best place to be with the best people. Take advantage of it while you're here. You're going to get out of here and say, man, why didn't I go talk to so-and-so? Why didn't I do that? Take advantage of it. It's all right here for you. It's an amazing experience, just the experience itself. But I've learned just firsthand through working with people like Irena and Career Services and other folks that you can make so much more out of this experience if you take advantage of what's here. and use that CIA card, play it whenever you can, because it gives you an opportunity to talk to people outside this place and say, hey, I'm from the CIA, and they're like, oh, really? It's like, and you go trail, or you just talk to somebody, you make another connection, you widen your net. It's huge. It's going to help you when you get out of here and years beyond. So thank you again for coming. I believe there might be some books upstairs if you're interested. Irena's here, and again, thank you so much for being here. It's really great.